Everyone in town said the ranch was cursed, and the widow who stayed behind was too stubborn or too broken to leave. Then one quiet man arrived, carrying nothing but a saddlebag and a silence that knew her pain too well. The notice had been pinned to the post office board for 2 weeks, curling at the corners, ink fading from wind and sun. Help wanted, ranch hand, room and board, fair wage, hard work. That's all it said. No one answered. Not even the ones desperate enough to shovel manure for nickels or sleep in barns to dodge the frost. Folks in town didn't speak of Nora Miller much anymore, not directly. They just shifted their eyes when she walked into the store, spoke softer when she passed, like grief could catch if you weren't careful. 3 years since the fire, 2 since her husband's body was pulled from the ruins, and still they called the place hexed. Cattle went lame, fences fell in storms that missed every other plot of land. Her last ranch hand lasted 6 days before packing up in the dead of night, muttering something about voices near the well. So Nora worked alone. She hauled feed, wrangled stubborn calves, patched roofs, and buried the last dog when it got bit by a rattler and laid down in the shade to die. Her palms blistered, her back ached, and her boots wore through at the toes, but she didn't bend, didn't break, just lit another cigarette, tied her hair back tighter, and kept moving. Then one morning, as the sky bled pale over the hills, she spotted movement by the gate. A man on a horse, not from town, not familiar. He dismounted slow, like someone whose bones remembered pain. Dust clung to him like a second skin. His coat was too heavy for summer and stitched along the sleeves like it had been mended by a hand that didn't care much for neatness. He didn't knock, didn't call out. Just walked up to the porch where she sat with her coffee, watching the sunrise like she always did. "You lost?" she asked, voice flat. He looked at her, not around her, not over her shoulder like most men did. His eyes were gray or maybe green, hard to tell under the brim of his hat. He didn't smile, didn't flinch when she added, "This land eats men, you know, swallows them whole. You still want the job?" He just gave a small nod, slow and steady, then tipped his hat once, a gesture more respectful than desperate. She didn't ask his name, not then, just jerked her chin toward the broken stretch of fence out near the western pasture. "Wood's in the barn. Nails too," she said. And without another word, he walked off in that direction, boots stirring the dust, horse trailing behind him without a tether. By midday, he'd fixed 15 posts, hands moving sure and quiet, like he'd been born with a hammer instead of a cradle. She watched from a distance, arms crossed, unsure whether to feel relieved or uneasy. Maybe both. Maybe that's what hope felt like after it had gone cold for too long. He didn't ask where to sleep, just unrolled his bedroll in the loft that night, beside the hay. Didn't ask what to eat either, just took the plate she set on the stoop and nodded once in thanks. Nora sat awake longer than usual, the wind whispering through the cracks in the siding. She stared at the ceiling, at the flickering shadows, and wondered what kind of man shows up without questions, takes a cursed job without fear, and doesn't blink when warned that death lives in the soil. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew the fence held that night, and for the first time in weeks, the cattle didn't wander. Eli worked like the land was his, though he never said more than 10 words in a row. He rose before dawn, boots crunching on frostbitten grass, and started repairs without needing to be told. He kept to himself, moved through the ranch like a man who'd been ghosted by noise long ago. He never asked about the burned barn out past the northern fence, its black ribs sticking up from the ground like the bones of some fallen beast. He didn't ask why the back room in the main house stayed bolted from the outside, its door scratched near the knob like something had tried to get out. He didn't ask about the rusted cradle still sitting in the root cellar. Most men would have asked. Eli didn't. Nora smoked more when he was near, not because she was nervous, not exactly, but because the silence between them made her chest itch. It wasn't uncomfortable, just thick, like wet wool. She'd sit on the porch with her cigarette burning low, watching him mend a fence rail or lead the mule toward the well. Every now and then he'd glance her way, not long, not lingering, just enough to let her know he knew she was watching. And each time he didn't speak, didn't question, didn't pry, something inside her clenched tighter. She didn't like questions. Never had. Not from the men in town who'd ask why she stayed after the fire. Not from her dead husband's sister who'd said maybe it was better this way. Not even from the preacher who told her God had a plan. If there was a plan, it had skipped over her entirely. One night, she heard Eli's boots on the porch after sundown. He'd finished moving the hay bales to the barn and was just standing out there, looking at the stars. She watched from the window, her hand hovering over the lantern wick. He didn't knock, didn't even shift his weight, just stood like a man waiting on nothing. Eventually, he stepped back into the dark, the sound of him fading toward the loft. Nora lay in bed later, blanket up to her chin, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The wind moaned against the walls, same as always, but this time, it felt different. Not colder, not louder, just more aware. The floorboards creaked now and then, old wood settling, or maybe not. Sometimes she swore she heard voices when there shouldn't be any, not angry, not crying, just murmurs like the walls remembered things she was trying to forget. She thought about Eli's hands, how they were strong but clean, no old scars, no busted knuckles, no ink from jail or tattoos of broken vows, not the kind of hands most ranch hands had. And yet he moved, like someone who'd rebuilt more than barns, like someone who understood loss without needing to name it. She didn't know why she'd hired him, maybe because he didn't flinch. Maybe because she wanted someone who wouldn't ask about the fire or the locked door or why she still wore her wedding ring even though the man had burned alongside the whiskey he swore didn't exist. Or maybe, just maybe, she wanted someone who'd already buried their own ghosts and wouldn't run when they met hers in the dark. The days passed like they were being poured from the same dusty jug, slow and steady and dry. Nora had lived through all kinds of silence. The kind that followed slammed doors, the kind that stretched between gravestones, the kind that settled over a house like ash after everything had gone wrong. But the silence Eli carried was different. His didn't bite or smother. It was just there, like air, like dust. You didn't notice it until it was gone. He worked like the sun told him to, starting before first light, and quitting only when the shadows stretched too long to ignore. He never asked for help, never bragged, never wasted time with words he didn't need. He talked to the horses in a voice that barely rose above the breeze, murmuring things Nora couldn't hear from the porch. But the horses listened. Even the mean one, the old gelding who'd thrown her last hand into the trough, stood still when Eli ran a brush down his spine. Every day, something was fixed without her asking. The back gate that had slammed shut in the wind for years now clicked into place with a soft latch. The old window in the kitchen that used to groan and stick had been oiled and propped open with a smooth bit of carved wood. She noticed the rain barrels were realigned to catch better. Someone had patched the corner of the chicken coop with wire tight enough to keep out coyotes. Eli never told her what he was doing, just did it. And for the first time in a long while, Nora didn't have to ask. She just had to notice. And she did. One night, after the sun had tucked itself behind the hills and the sky turned soft and violet, Nora stepped outside. She meant to bring in the laundry before the dew settled, but stopped when she saw the soft glow of a lantern near the old branding station. She crept closer, boots crunching on dry grass, but Eli didn't turn. He was sitting on a stool, head bent low, sanding something in his lap. The sound was gentle, rhythmic, like waves smoothing stone. She got close enough to see what it was. The iron cattle brand her husband had made years ago, the initials burned deep into the handle, WM for William Miller. Eli was sanding those letters down, slowly, like he was peeling away something heavy and rusted. He didn't hide it, didn't pause when she stepped up behind him, just kept working, his hands steady. Nora didn't speak, didn't ask why. Maybe because she already knew. That brand hadn't touched hide since the fire, since the cattle scattered and the fences fell. It had become a symbol of a name that lingered long after the man it belonged to had gone cold. a name spoken only in debt notices and bitter mutterings from townsfolk. She watched Eli work for a long while, the lantern light flickering against his jaw, the shadows dancing over the broken letters. And when he finally stopped, set the sanded wood aside, and stood, she met his eyes. He didn't offer an apology. He didn't explain. And she didn't need one. The morning was already hot when Nora stepped outside. The sun not yet high, but the air heavy, pressing down like a warning. The chickens scratched at the dry dirt near the porch, and from somewhere out back came the steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood. She didn't rush breakfast that day, just watched the dust float in the kitchen light and listened to that clean, sharp sound, thunk, pause, thunk again, like a heartbeat in the distance. When she finally brought the tin cup of water out to him, she found Eli at the stump behind the shed, his shirt damp and clinging to his back. He was in motion, arms rising and falling with a smoothness that spoke of habit, not effort. Chopping wood wasn't work to him. It was something else, maybe thinking, maybe forgetting. She stood for a moment, watching, the way he held his jaw tight, the way he paused after each split, breathing hard but quiet. She stepped closer, boots crunching over dry leaves, and held out the water without a word. He turned, wiping his hands roughly on his trousers, and reached for it. That's when she saw it. The collar of his shirt had slipped just enough to reveal the scar, thick and roped, pale against sun-darkened skin. It circled the base of his neck, like something once meant to end him but didn't finish the job. Not a scrape, not a knife mark. This was different. Something that gripped and held and pulled. A noose that failed. Her breath caught for just a second. He noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed everything, but he didn't cover it, didn't flinch away. He just took the cup from her, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. It was that touch, not the scar, that made him stiffen. Not a big flinch, just the twitch of a muscle, the way someone does when they remember something they thought they'd buried deep enough. It wasn't fear, not of her. It was older than that, quieter. She felt it like a cold draft, the kind that slips under doorways when no one's looking. She didn't say anything, just looked down at the axe, sunk in the stump, then back up at him. He drank slow, careful, eyes never leaving hers. When he handed the cup back, his hands were steady, but his shoulders didn't settle like they usually did. And when he bent to pick up another log, he moved just a bit too carefully, like he'd suddenly remembered someone was watching. Nora turned and walked back toward the house, the cup still cold in her palm, her thoughts louder than they'd been in days. She'd spent so long being the one people pitied, the one with the tragedy folks whispered about, the one who lit her cigarette with hands that never quite stopped shaking. But now, for the first time, she found herself wondering who carried more ghosts, the woman living in a house full of ashes, or the man chopping wood, like he was trying to forget a time he almost didn't survive. And in that wondering, something shifted. Not pity, not curiosity. Something slower, deeper, like a river starting to cut a new path in dry land. The letter came folded tight and creased from travel, dirt smudged along the edges, and her name written in a hand that used to slam doors and throw whiskey bottles when things didn't go his way. Nora didn't need to open it to know who it was from. Just seeing the miller scrawl across the envelope was enough to bring back the low, sharp voice of her dead husband's brother, Wade. The kind of man who smiled with his teeth and always made sure you knew what he owned or what he planned to. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out like something rotten. His words were sharp, written with the confidence of someone who thought paper gave him power. He said the ranch was owed to him, said William died with unpaid debts, said if she couldn't produce proof that the land was rightfully hers, he'd be coming for it before the next frost. No lawyer's signature, no court seal, just threats written in ink, thick with arrogance. She read it once, then again, not because she doubted what it said, but because part of her hoped she'd missed something, that it wasn't as bad as it felt. But it was worse. It meant someone still believed she didn't belong here, even after all the sweat and bone she'd given the land. It meant the fire hadn't taken everything, It had left behind vultures. She didn't cry, didn't throw the letter or clutch it to her chest like some wronged widow in a dime novel. She just stood up, opened the stove door, and fed the letter to the flames one corner at a time. Watched it curl and blacken, the words turning to ash with a soft hiss. Eli had come in from the field just then, shirt damp, hair clinging to his forehead. He paused at the door, watching the way she stood, arms crossed, jaw tight, the stove still open, and the last edges of the paper curling inward like dying leaves. He didn't ask what it said, didn't try to peek at what little was left. He just stepped closer, slow and steady like he always did, and looked at her. "You need help?" he asked, voice low and even. She turned her head just slightly, enough to meet his eyes. "I don't need saving," she said, not sharp, just tired. He nodded, the barest movement, then said, "Didn't say you did, just offering to stand close in case it rains." It was the way he said it, not like a man trying to prove something, not like someone hoping for thanks, just simple, quiet, like he meant every word. For a long second, she stood still. Then she closed the stove door with a soft clink and leaned back against the counter, arms still folded, but something in her shoulders less stiff than before. Outside, the wind stirred dry leaves along the dirt path, and somewhere in the distance, a storm cloud rolled slow and heavy across the horizon. The sun hadn't even burned the mist off the pasture when they came, 4 riders moving slow up the long dirt road like they already owned the place. Wade Miller rode in front, smug as ever, wearing a dark coat he hadn't earned, and a smirk that looked carved into his face. Behind him were 3 men Nora didn't recognize, rough-looking, hard eyes, the kind that liked being on the wrong side of a fight. None of them smiled. They didn't have to. Their horses stomped dust into the porch boards as they came to a stop, and Wade leaned forward in the saddle like he was settling into a familiar chair. "Well," he said, "look at this. Still standing. Thought for sure this place would have crumbled by now." His voice was oily, smooth with poison under the words. Nora stood on the porch, arms crossed, her boots planted firm on the boards her hands had nailed down herself. She didn't flinch, didn't back up. Eli stepped out from the side of the barn, quiet as always, wiping his hands on a rag, and came to stand between her and the riders without a word. He didn't glare, didn't square his shoulders like he was looking for a fight. He just stood there, tall and still, like a wall made of muscle and quiet warning. Wade's smirk twitched. "You got yourself a bodyguard now?" he said, looking Eli up and down. "You think that's going to stop what's coming?" Eli said nothing. He didn't blink. Wade pulled a folded paper from his coat and waved it in the air. "Your husband owed me. You know that. You married into that debt. This land ain't yours, Nora. Never was. And unless I've got that deed in my hands in 2 weeks, we'll be coming back. And next time, we won't be so polite." One of the men behind him spit into the dirt, the others chuckling low like they'd already played this scene before. Nora didn't answer, just stared at Wade until the silence thickened. Then she said, calm as still water, 2 weeks. Wade grinned wide, tipped his hat like he thought he'd already won, and turned his horse. They rode off slow, kicking up the dust like smoke from a fuse. Eli didn't speak as he watched them go. His jaw was tight, hands still at his sides. Later that evening, he set up a stool near the barn door, brought out the sharpening stone, and laid the long hunting knife across his knee. The sound of steel on stone echoed through the warm dusk, steady and slow. After that, he brought out the rifle, checked the chamber, cleaned it with a cloth soaked in oil, then laid it across his lap like it was part of him. Nora watched from the window, her fingers curled tight around a chipped coffee cup, her eyes dark and unreadable. She didn't ask him what he planned to do. He didn't offer. Outside, the wind kicked up, and the sky bruised purple. A storm was coming, one that couldn't be outrun. The night was dry and still, the kind of stillness that made every creak in the wood feel louder than it should. The storm hadn't broken yet, but it pressed on the air, heavy and waiting. Nora stood out near the fence, a bottle in one hand and 2 tin cups in the other. The sky above stretched wide and dark, stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. She didn't call out. Just waited until she heard the soft crunch of boots behind her. Eli walked up slow, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair still damp from washing up. He stopped beside her, hands in his pockets, not asking why she was out there or what she held. She didn't offer a greeting, just poured the whiskey into each cup and handed him one. They stood in silence at first, the kind that wasn't empty but thick with things unspoken. She took a sip, then another, letting the burn run through her chest and settle somewhere deep. "It wasn't lightning," she said finally, voice low. "The night the barn burned. That's what I told folks. What I told myself for a while too, but it wasn't." Eli didn't move, didn't speak, just listened. "It started in the back corner," she went on, "right where William kept the still. He always swore he was done with it, but I think he fired it up that night. Drunk, careless, mad at something or someone. Maybe me." She laughed, short and bitter. "He used to say I didn't know my place, that a good wife didn't speak louder than a whisper." Eli took a slow sip, his gaze never leaving the horizon. The wind stirred a strand of her hair, and she didn't bother tucking it back. "He was in the barn when it happened," she said. "They found his body near the door. Could have made it out. Could have run." She looked down at her boots, the dirt around them cracked and dry. "Sometimes, I wonder if he just didn't want to." Eli was quiet a long time, then said, voice low, "Sometimes men build cages so tight around themselves, they can't tell where the bars end and the fire begins." She turned her head to look at him, the faint light catching the lines in his face, the scar on his neck, half hidden by his collar. "You talk like someone who's seen too much." He met her gaze, eyes steady. Maybe I just know what it's like to live through something and not be sure what's worse, the fire or what comes after." Nora took another drink, her hand brushing his as she lowered the cup. "You're not like the others." Eli's voice was quiet but sure. "Neither are you." And just like that, something shifted. Not loud, not sudden, just a quiet cracking open of something long shut. They didn't touch, didn't move closer, but the space between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge. The wind picked up, stirring the trees and lifting the dust. Nora tilted her head back, looking at the stars, the bottle still in her hand. "Storm's still coming," she said. Eli nodded. "Let it." She hadn't meant to go through his things. That morning, Eli had ridden out early to check the southern pasture, leaving his saddlebag hanging from the hook on the barn wall. One of the straps had come loose, and she only meant to fix it, tighten the buckle, maybe sew the edge where the leather had started to fray. But when she opened the flap, something slipped out. A worn photograph, edges curled, paper gone soft from time and touch. She caught it before it hit the dirt, her fingers brushing the image like it might vanish if she held it too tight. A woman stood in the center, dark-haired, chin tilted up like she wasn't used to smiling for pictures. Beside her was a boy, no more than 6, standing with his small hand clutching her skirt, eyes wide and curious. Their faces were faded, the sunlight having drained some of the detail, but not enough to hide the bond between them. Nora stared at it longer than she meant to. There was something in the way the woman looked at the camera, proud, almost defiant, like she dared the world to forget them. The boy had her same sharp jaw, same set to his mouth. And the more Nora looked, the more she realized the woman shared something else, Eli's eyes. She tucked the photo back where it came from, careful, like it was something sacred. By the time Eli returned, sweat on his brow and dust on his sleeves, the saddlebag was hanging just as he left it. She didn't say a word, but he saw it in her face, the way her eyes held his a moment too long, the question she wasn't asking. That night, after the work was done and the sky had settled into a deep navy blue, Eli found her near the corral, leaning against the post with her arms folded and the stars reflected in her eyes. He didn't sit, just stood beside her, looking out at the field. "She was my sister," he said after a long silence. "Her name was Mary. The boy was hers, named Samuel." Nora didn't speak, just let the quiet stretch, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. "They got caught in the middle of something that had nothing to do with them," he said. "I'd gone out to buy feed, came back and found the sheriff's rope still swinging. His voice didn't shake, didn't harden. It was flat, low, like he'd worn the edges of the story smooth from telling it too many times in his own head. They were after a man who'd robbed the bank 2 towns over. Someone said he'd passed through my sister's place. That was all it took. He paused, jaw working. Never got the right man. Never even looked real hard. Nora reached out slowly, her hand resting just above his. Not gripping, not holding, just near. I didn't stay, he went on. Didn't bury them where it happened. I found a place west of there, quiet and high. Put them under a cottonwood tree. Then I kept going. She nodded, her throat tight. Is that why you don't look back? He looked at her then, eyes dark and tired. Because there's nothing left behind me worth seeing. And somehow, in the stillness between their words, Nora felt the truth settle deep. He hadn't been running. He'd just been moving forward, the only way he knew how, by riding toward places where names didn't matter and no one asked what grief you carried in your saddlebag. She didn't say sorry, didn't offer soft words or promises, just stood beside him as the stars turned above, 2 people bound by what they'd lost, and by what they were slowly finding in each other. The night broke quiet, too quiet for a place that had seen trouble come and go like the wind. Nora had just finished locking the barn doors when she smelled it, that thick, bitter scent that didn't belong to livestock or dust. Smoke. Real smoke. The kind that crawled into your throat and turned your breath into ash. She ran to the edge of the porch and saw the glow rising beyond the northern fence, orange and angry, licking at the sky like a warning. She didn't have to guess who'd done it. Wade had promised 2 weeks. It had only been 10 days. Before she could move, gunfire cracked sharp through the stillness, the sound of hooves thundering close. She turned to shout for Eli, but he was already there, rifle in hand, eyes cold and focused. He didn't speak, just grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the house as another shot rang out, splintering wood near the front post. They ran together, dodging between the coop and the shed, the fire casting long shadows across the yard. Behind them came shouting, boots stomping, bullets hitting dirt. The barn burst into flame next, a spray of sparks lighting the sky, and Nora felt her stomach twist at the sound of horses screaming. At the cellar door, Eli turned and fired once, a short, deafening crack, then swung it open and pushed her inside. She stumbled down the steps, coughing, the air already thick with heat and panic. He followed, slamming the door shut above them, barring it with a length of timber that groaned as it settled into place. In the dark, she felt his arms around her, steady and warm. She pressed her face to his chest, breathing hard, fingers twisting in the fabric of his shirt, as if holding on tighter might stop the world from falling apart again. I don't want to lose anyone else, she whispered, voice shaking, almost too soft to hear. Eli didn't speak at first, just held her, his hand moving slow up her back, not to calm her, but to tell her he was real, still here, still breathing. When he did speak, his voice was rough, pulled from someplace deep, then stopped pushing away the ones who stay. She closed her eyes, letting those words sink in, letting them curl into the hollow places inside her that still ached from years of being left behind. The heat pressed against the walls above, smoke curling through the cracks. But in that moment, wrapped in Eli's arms, she felt something steadier than fear. They stayed there until the gunfire faded, until footsteps retreated, until the night quieted again, not peaceful, but empty, like the air after a scream. When they finally climbed out into the dark, the pasture was gone, the barn still burning, and the sky above them was streaked with ash. But they were standing, together. And this time, she didn't let go. The sun hadn't climbed far when they started digging. The sky was pale and wide, a quiet kind of morning, the kind that should have brought peace, but only carried the sharp scent of smoke and the bitter silence left behind after something awful. The pasture was charred black, grass turned to ash, fence posts still smoldering where the fire had touched them. And in the far corner, near what used to be the north corral, lay the bodies of 3 cows and a foal, curled like they'd tried to run but the flames had caught them first. Nora didn't speak as she walked toward them. boots crunching over scorched earth. She held a shovel in her hands, her knuckles white around the handle. Eli followed behind her, same quiet steps, same unspoken weight pressing down on his shoulders. They didn't need words. Not now. They chose a spot just past the rise, where the soil hadn't been touched by fire, and started digging. The earth was stubborn, dry, and packed, but they kept at it, one shovel at a time, sweat beading along their brows as the sun rose higher. A few birds called from the distant trees, confused maybe, or mourning too. The grave was wide. It had to be. And with each scoop of dirt thrown aside, Nora felt something inside her come loose. Not broken, not quite, but shifted. Grief didn't scream anymore. It just sat in her chest, heavy and aching. She didn't mean to fall, but when her foot slipped on the edge of the trench, she dropped to her knees hard, hands catching in the loose dirt. She stayed there, breath shallow, shoulders trembling. Eli paused, the shovel still in his grip, watching her with that same steady gaze he always wore, as if seeing her come undone wasn't a surprise. Just another piece of truth. Nora didn't cry. She hadn't for years. But she reached out, fingers trembling, and gripped his wrist like it was the only thing left that hadn't turned to ash. His skin was warm, solid, and he let her hold on, didn't pull away. Just knelt beside her and pressed his free hand to her back, not patting or comforting like most would, but grounding her, letting her know he was there. She looked at him then, dirt on her cheeks, smoke still in her hair, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, not a promise either, just recognition. That they were both still standing in a world that kept trying to knock them down, and that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to do it alone anymore. When the grave was deep enough, they moved the bodies in one by one, not rushing, not speaking, just doing what needed to be done. The dirt covered them slowly, each layer pressing down the past, sealing it beneath the earth like a prayer said without words. By the time the last shovel of soil fell, the sun was bright above them, casting long shadows across the blackened field. Nora stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked at the grave they'd dug together. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Eli nodded once, and the silence between them felt less like a burden and more like a bond, the kind forged not by what you say, but by what you carry, side by side. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the hills when the riders came again, fast this time, not creeping slow like before. Dust rose around them like smoke from a coming fire. Nora saw the shapes moving at the edge of the pasture and didn't wait to wonder. She grabbed the rifle from beside the door, heart already thudding in her chest, and ran. Eli was already in the yard, shotgun in hand, calm as if it were another chore to finish before supper. His eyes swept the ridge, jaw tight, breath steady. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Wade didn't come alone. He brought 6 men this time, rifles drawn, their faces tight with something that wasn't courage but felt just as dangerous. They didn't shout demands. They just opened fire. The first shots cracked through the air, splinters flying from the porch post as Nora ducked behind it, bullets biting into the wood. Eli moved fast, returning fire with sharp, measured blasts, forcing the riders to scatter. One man fell from his horse, twisting in the dust, his scream lost in the echo of gunfire. Nora spotted Wade riding along the fence line, circling wide like a wolf looking for a weak spot. She raised her rifle and fired, missed, cursed under her breath, and ducked again. Another shot rang out, sharp and close, and she turned in time to see Eli stumble, a dark bloom spreading across his shoulder. He didn't fall. He gritted his teeth, braced himself against the side of the barn, and lifted his gun again like the pain didn't matter. She saw his knees shake, but his eyes stayed locked, steady and sure. "You all right?" she shouted. He didn't answer, just nodded once and kept firing. Nora moved fast, slipping through the barn's side door, weaving through shadows, her boots crunching over hay and blood. She found a clear line of sight just as Wade dismounted, rifle in hand, stepping toward the house like he was walking into a bar he already owned. "You never should have stayed here," he shouted, voice hard. "You think one drifter and a dead man's name can stop what's owed?" Nora's hands didn't shake. Not this time. She raised her rifle, aimed slow and sure, and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the land, sharp and final. Wade crumpled in the dirt, his hat falling last. The others didn't stay long after that. One helped the wounded man onto a horse, another dragged a body out of the way. None of them looked back. Dust trailed behind them as they disappeared over the ridge. The sheriff arrived just as the last light was slipping from the sky. He looked at the bodies in the yard, at the blood drying in the dirt, at the way Eli leaned against the porch, his shirt soaked through. Nora stood beside him, her rifle still in her hand. The sheriff said nothing for a long time, just pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, and sighed. "Some debts get paid in dust," he muttered, eyes scanning the wreckage. Then added, "I didn't see nothing here." Then he tipped his hat and rode off. Nora helped Eli inside, one arm around his waist, her hand warm against his ribs. And for the first time since the fire, the ranch felt quiet, not with fear, but with peace. A kind earned the hard way, the only kind that lasted. The days stretched longer as summer settled in, warm winds brushing through the fields like fingers smoothing out the scars. The burned grass in the northern pasture gave way to new green shoots, stubborn and soft, growing like forgiveness. The horses had calmed again. One of the mares gave birth in the quiet hours before dawn, and Nora found herself smiling more often without even meaning to. The barn had been patched up, not pretty, but strong. The fence was whole again. The porch no longer sagged. Eli fixed things without asking, and she let him. Not because she couldn't do it herself, but because there was comfort in the way he did it. Steady, careful, like he wasn't just mending wood, but putting something right in the world. He stayed, not because she asked him to, not because he owed her. He just never rode off again, and she never told him he should. They didn't speak about what they were, didn't need to. There were no vows, no rings, no promises carved into stone. But each night, his boots ended up beside hers at the door, lined up like they belonged. And each morning, before the light had fully stretched across the room, she'd feel the slow rise and fall of his chest behind her, his arm draped over her waist, his breath steady against her neck. She still wore her husband's name on paper, but not in her heart. That part had burned away long ago, leaving space for something quieter, something honest. The past was still there, in the ashes of the field, in the smell of smoke that sometimes crept back with a gust of wind, in the way she still turned toward the sound of certain voices and braced herself, but it didn't rule her anymore. It didn't have its claws in her. Eli never brought up the photo again, never spoke of the grave under the cottonwood tree, but sometimes she'd find him standing near the edge of the pasture, eyes fixed on the hills, holding a piece of paper worn soft in his hands. And when he came back to the house, he looked lighter, like something in him had finally exhaled. They laugh sometimes now, small moments, like when the goat got into the garden again, or when the new colt tried to follow her into the kitchen, the kind of laughter that didn't feel borrowed or forced. It belonged to them, and it came easy. Nora planted new flowers by the front step, not because it needed to look nice, but because she wanted to see something bloom. Life had taught her that not everything lived, not everything stayed, but the things that did, the things that rooted themselves deep, those were worth tending. And every time Eli took her hand, or brushed his fingers along her back as he passed, she felt something strong settle inside her. Not the wild hope she used to carry like a fragile jar, but something solid, something built plank by plank from survival and kindness, and choosing each other again and again. Home, she realized, wasn't the place you came from. It was the place you built after everything else fell apart. And this ranch, this man, this quiet love was hers. Fully. Finally, hers. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away, click like, and subscribe to this channel for more raw, powerful stories that deserve to be heard.